Um, I'm actually very happy to see you here. And although I've known you for so many years, but to have such kind of a semi-formal or formal kind of an engagement is also very useful. So I'll just explain the context of this work. This work I am doing essentially to document the urban sanitation journey in South Asia for different countries, and from friends and peers like you, who I believe are experts and can shed light on some critical aspects of the urban sanitation journey and the current context and challenges. So the idea is to have a discussion on how we see the present and future. So let me just quickly begin by asking you to just share a brief introduction about yourself so that those who don't know you can understand the work which you have.
Yes, my name is Vishwanath. I'm a civil engineer and an urban planner by qualification. I'm now with a small group called the Biome Trust. I teach at the Azim Premji University, a subject called water. I've been working on the water, wastewater, sanitation, rainwater harvesting sector for the last 34 years. My special interest is in ecological sanitation, rainwater harvesting, and integrated urban water management.
Okay. And your engagement has been both with the formal institutional setups as well as the society ones?
I have been lucky to not only work with Samaj, but Sarkar and Bazaar also. So I've been able to work with policy level, with the Karnataka State Urban Water Policy, or the Bangalore Karnataka Wastewater Policy, Bangalore Water Supply Sewerage Board. I'm a technical committee member, which looks after approval of projects of both urban water and sanitation. That's at the state level. With civil society groups, I've been working a lot on issues of rights and entitlements. And with the informal sector, I've been partnering with farmers and well diggers and honeysucker manufacturers on the use of sludge and wastewater in a productive agricultural fashion.
Yeah, that's been very helpful, actually, the kind of posts which you have sent, and on various platforms you have shared your experience of working with well diggers and water conservation initiatives across South India. Now, coming to the first part about the evolution of urban sanitation in the Indian context, how do you see or how do you define the work which has been done in India at the institutional level as well as maybe legislative level on urban sector, urban water and sanitation? How do you see that from, say, post-independence, not going back before that?
Yeah, but very quickly to touch back before that, just to set the context, I think cholera was a great driver for sanitation in India, and plague was the second biggest driver for both urban sanitation, especially cholera, which started to happen in urban areas, and plague, which started to happen in urban areas, has driven a lot of sanitation. In my city, Bangalore alone, we started the first underground sewerage network systems in 1903, just immediately after the plague of 1899. And at that time, the British imagination was to hand it over to city sanitation boards, right? And then to city authorities themselves. So that history has continued after independence, after 1947. Broadly, the issue has been a health issue, with health commissioners trying to look at this particular aspect. And then later on, civil engineers and sanitation engineers from city improvement trust boards or boards which were set up for local governance in the Indian context. That's been the sort of institutional framework under which it has worked.
Okay. So in terms of the evolution, I think Bangalore and the metros always had a priority. But in terms of the national and other states, India predominantly being a rural country at the time of independence, we didn't have an urban ministry at that time at the central level or even at state levels. So as you're rightly saying, urban sanitation was focused as a public health good, and the center CPHEO was part of the health ministry at that time. And then as urbanization started increasing, essentially through a rural-urban migration, and as urban planning and master plans, and you have been a student of planning as well. So this issue of how to extend the same systems which were there in the central part of the towns to the peri-urban. That trajectory happened. So in that, what were some of the hits and some of the misses we have seen in the last 70 years of independence?
Well, one of the things that I saw in Mysore state and predominantly in Karnataka, where I've been working a bit, was the suburbanization was seen as an answer to the plague again, right? So the first layouts which were formed, which were formal developments, were in the periphery or in the suburb of the old market area of the town. So you had the cantonment part of the town, you had the market area of the Pete area where it was a local populace. Then the emergence of the suburbs started. So in Bangalore, Malleshwaram, Baswangudi, these were areas which were planned, and this was a response to the plague and essentially a response to the plague. There, the design would be on what was called conservancies, because still there was no concept of a sewerage network, and it was still open defecation in a strange sense. And the conservancy was a place where people would just defecate, and sanitation workers would come and clean up the place. You would now call it manual scavenging. So even in urban areas, it was manual scavenging based, where people would come and remove the night soil. Interestingly, the night soil, even then, just after the 40s, was seen as a manure. It was taken with vegetable and market refuse and usually composted and used by farmers, because cities were not very far from rural areas. So the concept was still rural in mindset, involved manual scavenging, involved reuse by agriculture to a large extent for a long time. Incidentally, the first water utility, specialized water and sanitation utility, was the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board, which was set up in 1964. But this was a response not to a sanitation challenge as much as a water challenge, because water had to be brought from a far distance, so a specialized city-level institution was created. Followed quickly by a state-level institution called the Karnataka Urban Water Supply and Drainage Board. This became the model for several states. Several cities started creating their own specialized water and sanitation utilities, like the Delhi Jal Board, or the Hyderabad Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewerage Board, or the Chennai Metro Water Supply and Sewerage Board, whereas in Mumbai, it remained with the municipal government. But at state level too, the response for all small towns and medium towns was to set up a state level parastatal, which would help them with sanitation management.
I was talking to Subhagato, and he was saying a lot of these boards and utilities which came up in the 60s and 70s also came up under the loans and the grants which donors or World Bank or ADB was giving at that time. And they made it a conditionality or a requirement that at least you set up these utilities which are separate from the municipalities, and they would have the functions of construction. Like BWSSP essentially has the mandate for infrastructure. I mean, they are paid actually for the pipes and length of kilometers of work done. So in a way, this trajectory happened around that time. But if you see Maharashtra, where Dinesh Mehta and they work, and if you compare UP, there is a big difference whereas in Maharashtra, the entire ULBs are independent and all the municipal functions are devolved to the municipalities. I mean, Bangalore is an exception. It has 50% of the Karnataka urban or total population, I guess. So, but compared to other states, we still have this various kind of parastate agencies who are still engaged in infrastructure construction. And then we have urban local bodies who are just handed over assets and they're supposed to run and maintain them. With the result that a lot of actually our sewerage infrastructure is in a bad state. So is that a planning failure or is it a technology failure? What do you see that?
Well, so as you rightly pointed out, the belief was that if you develop the capital part of the project, then the operations and maintenance would be run by the municipalities. But time and again, it was found that the municipalities were simply not involved in the planning part, so did not understand what the project was about, and did not have the human resource capacities or the financial capacities to run these projects, whether it be water supply or even sanitation. And so in Karnataka, especially, they would promptly hand it back to the KUWSDB, the Karnataka Water Supply and Drainage Board. And in many cases where the towns took over, let's say, for example, sewerage networks and sewage treatment plants, they failed to function after a short time, or they functioned very suboptimally. So this conundrum has still to be sorted out. It's the municipalities' finances themselves are weak, and within that, the water and sanitation component is weaker. They are not capable currently of being able to run them, and neither have they been strengthened to run them. And the parastatals are acted as large-scale contractors, beyond which their imagination of helping the municipalities to run it has not been there at all.
So, I mean, if we quickly jump then to this issue of what is the kind of tinkering or change that can be possible at the institutional level? Will more centralization, or if we are talking of decentralization, what is it that we are talking about for different kinds of cities, whether it's large metros or small towns or medium towns? So, I mean, if you see some of the recommendations which have come recently from ASCI and other institutions, is for institutionalizing something called integrated urban water management at the state and city level, and creating more kind of governance bodies, planning bodies within the state and the city systems. Do you think is that the way to go?
The lessons that we have to learn is that perhaps the large cities are now in a phase where they can try and attempt IUWM, But for smaller towns and smaller municipalities and mid-sized municipalities, we still will have to think how to strengthen the local body ability and finances to be able to manage water and sanitation. It cannot be divorced away from the planning norm of the town also. Because what we find in many towns and cities is to get water and sanitation into areas which are ill-planned is very difficult, if not impossible. And that cannot be redressed by just a water and sanitation sector intervention. It has to be holistic. It has to look at how we imagine cities. What is the access to land? What is the access to housing? How do we imagine the urbanization itself? And on that, we must layer urban water and sanitation. And essentially, it's the 74th Amendment, as it clearly recognizes, has to be actualized, and municipalities have to be strengthened to be able to manage it. It cannot be done at a parastatal level, is my thinking now.
You're saying parastatal level is fine, but you still feel there is a need to create some institutions at the state level, at least to guide all the cities, because our system still is under a federal system where states are, responsible to the center, not the cities. So would a mechanism where we have a creation of, say, something like a state level integrated urban water management authority, under which then there are creation of city level coordination mechanisms, and then we have various under which there are these urban local water supply providers are then accountable. Is that kind of a framework reasonable, or will it create more hierarchy and more bureaucracy process, given that you have worked on, say, 7 agencies in Bangalore responsible for lakes and those kind of issues? Will it add to another layer in that sense?
So here's the challenge. The KUWSDB is I taken as an example, which you could imagine as the Karnataka Urban Water Supply and Drainage Board, which was responsible for over 240 towns in Karnataka to design their water supply and sanitation projects. Right. So they are supposed to be working on developing plans and then raising the monies and implementing water supply and sanitation projects. The first problem was there never was enough money for water supply and sanitation coverage, sewerage coverage. Even now, it will take 20,000 crores for covering the whole cities with sewerage networks in Karnataka alone, right? That's the kind of numbers we have, and that monies are unlikely to come in the next 10 to 20 years, given the current rates of financing and budget provisions that we are raising. Second point was there was never any consultation with the town as to what the plan was, right? So the KUWSDB would land up with a plan, which was a technical plan for water supply and sanitation, and then confront the town with that plan at the end of the project itself. So towns never understood, never discussed within as to what was the objective of the plan. Was it universal coverage? How would the plan detail itself out at ward level? Would every household have access to it? What would be the kind of costs expected to be paid? What would be the service level that the town households would need to achieve? These kind of ward level consultations or even city level consultations never happen with the KOWSTB and cannot happen with a parastatal. It has to be the mandate of the local body to be able to do this and to drive it. Because ultimately water and sanitation is a political subject which has to be democratically discussed. And we have to arrive at certain service level standards which are relevant for each town. You can't run a 135 liter per capita per day water supply and then say that 80% of it will become sewerage and therefore I'll run it on 80%. And then the town finds out that there's not enough water. Then the sewerage system does not work. So this one standard, one design, one approach fits all is doomed to failure. Local conditions are very, very different, and many of these plans have to be evolved from a bottom-up approach, which is practical and doable. Otherwise, we raise aspirations and then we consistently fail in delivering any output. And therefore, there is a lot of distrust of this current ecosystem, right? So we have to regain the trust by democratizing it and decentralizing it, for which we have to build the capacities of local bodies. They are woefully undercapacitated, and I keep repeating it, both financially and in terms of human resources. One attempt, which I will talk to you, Depinder, very quickly, is what we tried in Mulbagal, a small town of about 35,000 to 50,000 population, close to Bangalore, about 120 kilometers. We tried an IUWM approach. What we thought would work was to embed a project unit with the municipality. A project unit consisting of a civil engineer who understood the water supply network, a hydrogeologist who understood groundwater, but then a community expert who knows how to communicate what the project is about to the elected representatives of the municipality and to the people of the municipality, right? And they were reporting to the municipality at all phases from the project conceptualization itself. So, and then the idea was that when the DPU understands the project and then from the planning stage, then implements it, and then when the time comes for handover, the town itself, the corporators, the whole elected representatives, as well as the whole executive would understand what the project was about and then would be able to take care of it. But this was easier said than done. We tried it, we failed miserably in that particular aspect. But this is an approach we'll have to take.
So this is interesting. So what you're saying is it's like a PMU, which is standard terminology used for most projects, but in a different context. It's a PMU which reports to the people in a way rather than to the chief executive. Correct.
It reports to the elected body of the town and is paid by the elected body of the town. It's not paid by a separate project itself. The monies flow through the corporation or municipality as it is, and every meeting of the corporation or municipality, this PMU will attend every meeting, and there will be an agenda on water and sanitation. So that was the attempt.
So I think I also agree with you that strengthening the urban local body and making it part of the political commitment is more important rather than making IUWM, as it is called, another hierarchical or an administrative unit chaired by municipal commissioners and managed by different secretaries and departments. So that's one approach which has been suggested, and let's hope that doesn't work on the ground. So if we look at and the example which you gave was for a small town in Karnataka. So if we mega cities, and since I was talking to some friends in Bangladesh and Nepal and Pakistan, so the larger cities, what kind of a decentralized IUWM or what kind of a, because for Delhi or Bangalore, there can't be one, PMU of 4 people working. So there, the urban local bodies, for example, in Delhi, we now have 3 municipalities. Earlier there was 1, but even 3 are, quite large. And still in Delhi we have, and this is typical of South Asia, where the solid waste, street cleaning and street cleaning is with the municipality, and sewerage, water supply and drainage is with the utility or the board. So there is usually this bifurcation, and it is said that this creates a problem. And of course, the third is these para-state utilities at the state level. So this kind of a trifurcation, but at the service level, there is this bifurcation of somebody is responsible for some functions and some are for the other. So taking from your experience and your understanding, what can work given these, for a large metro especially, how do we see that for Delhi, how can they go about it? And recently, Delhi Jal Board came up with this scheme that they will divide the entire city of Delhi into 7 zones. And for them, it was a contractual management issue. So they were dealing with a lot of contractors. So they said, we will divide Delhi into 7 zones, and each zone will be handed out to one contractor. And that contractor would be responsible for everything. So we don't have to ensure that the joints are in place and, one contractor hasn't left something out for the other contractor. So there also, the focus is still very much on administrative and technocratic kind of decentralization. So for large cities, what kind of devolution or decentralization we can look at?
Well, one of the challenges that when you design a water supply network, you have hydraulic zones, like you were mentioning. In our city, we have 64 hydraulic zones for the BWSSB, right? So these are zones with overhead tanks and supply systems, which are independent, let us say separate, 64 zones. Whereas we have 198 wards, which are administrative zones, which are elected corporators. So somewhere we'll have to find a match between the 64 and 198. That's one thing. The second is the challenge of watersheds. Now, you have hydraulic zones, but you have urban watersheds. Typically, we have now, for example, 26 sewage treatment plants in the city, and they all fall in different watersheds and different administrative zones. So that's one challenge that needs to be fixed. But the simple democratic challenge can easily be addressed by saying that the wards, there will be a ward committee meeting, and in that ward committee, you will have an agenda on water supply and sanitation. The agenda will be simple. First, how many households are there in the ward which are connected to water supply? How many households are connected to sanitation systems? And is there a plan to get universal connection or not? Which the BWSSB will have to explain to the ward committee, right? And then you monitor that on every monthly meeting of the ward committee. You monitor universalization. The second thing that you monitor are complaints. What are the complaints that citizens have of water supply shortage or sanitation shortage? In terms of services, right? It's not just only access, but also, let's say, public toilets or community toilets, which people need. That needs to be discussed at the ward committee level. This beginning of democratization, where the assistant executive engineer reports to the ward committee. Typically, one assistant executive engineer in Bangalore would report to 3 ward committees. It's not a very tough task. And the agenda to be discussed is also not very tough, would be an excellent improvement on the given system. At the broader democratic level, the BWSSB should report to the Metropolitan Planning Committee to say what is the overall plan for the city and its growth, and there it gets democratic clarity from the MPC. Unfortunately, both the MPCs and the ward committees are dysfunctional. They function sporadically. The MPC is more or less defunct in Bangalore. The ward committees sometimes function, sometimes don't. So therefore, unless the democratic system is already in place and functioning, further democratization of water and sanitation may face a challenge, but it's possible to do it.
What is MPC in this case?
The Metropolitan Planning Committee, which is a 73rd Amendment devolution, where at the metropolitan level, all institutions come together and have an elected representative there, which decides for the city as a whole, the MPC, the Metropolitan Planning Committee. This is mandated under the 74th Amendment. All cities are supposed to have MPCs. Like you have to have DPCs as part of the 73rd Amendment, district planning committees. For metropolitan areas, you have to have metropolitan planning committees.
Okay. So thanks. I think this is fine. If you want to decentralize and actually implement the amendment, the 74th Amendment, and instead of trying to create more structures, make the existing ones operational. The challenge in I see is that these ward committees are, as you were saying, they are also very large. And, a ward in Delhi will have, say, about 1 lakh population, or sometimes, more than that.
So we are lucky we have 45,000 here. And so the wards themselves need to be catching up with the 45,000 number, because that's a broadly workable number. 45,000 people means about 9,000 households, which is a workable number.
Okay. Yeah. But I think that is somewhere where more thought and energy has to go, and advocacy. So for we are not pushing it there. We are trying to look at some quick fix solution to make the system more efficient. And in the process, it actually leads to more centralization than we are talking. I was surprised, for example, in Karachi, they said they don't even have one functional sewage treatment plant. And for solid waste, they are now centralizing it at the entire province level, at Sindh level. So that's the kind of danger also of falling back on more centralization when your existing systems don't work.
Here, there's a very fascinating example, Depinder, if I have to mention it. We now have a 75% functionality of our sewage treatment plants. So, and we will have 100% functionality, or let's say 90% functionality in the coming 6 months. Two reasons why this has happened. Functionality meaning STPs are there and they're getting the sewage which they're supposed to get, and they're treating it to the extent that they're supposed to treat it, right? So we are lucky now, we are treating of the 1,600 MLD which is being generated in Bangalore, 1,600 million liters per day. Right now, the treatment which is happening is 1,100 million liters per day, 1,100 MLD, right? Which is a significant number. Two reasons why this is occurring. One, citizen activism and judicial activism. The citizens have gone to court demanding that sewage no longer flow in the storm drains and reach lakes, and the courts have taken it up, the NGT, the Karnataka High Court, and the Supreme Court, having come down very strongly in the Pollution Control Board and the WSSCC. But the second very interesting reason is, this treated wastewater is now being sent to the districts of Kolar, Chikballapur, Bangalore Rural, which are drought-affected districts. They are filling up tanks and lakes there. The farmers are now seeing the benefits of this water flows and how to use it. And the farmers will not accept this wastewater not flowing in their pipes, not reaching their tanks. So there will be a pressure from the consumer, the end consumer of the treated wastewater, which will force these STPs to work. And they will have to work at a quality because the farmers will protest if the wastewater is not treated enough, right? So these kind of compacts need to be created at a regional scale also.
Yeah, this I was about to ask you because very few people know about this. And when I was sharing this with Pakistan and Bangladesh, they were quite interested to understand how it can actually, especially Pakistan, because it has a similar dryland kind of agroclimatic connection with India. So they were interested in understanding how this kind of a Bangalore has actually, and what we are now that the farmers will actually pressurize and ensure that the quality treated meets their requirements and standards, and also the people on the way will ensure that it doesn't smell or if the BOD levels are contained.
So, absolutely. So the court has ensured that it is online. The treatment plant parameters are online for this treated wastewater. And so right now I can go to the website and check what is the quality, and the farmers will ensure it at the end of the pipe that it is actually the online figures are correct or not. And it's not just quality, they will also demand quantity, because they see that without the quantity, it is not going to cover the 137 lakes which are supposed to be covered. 75 have now been covered. So there's increasing pressure from farmers to make sure that more and more treated wastewater comes into the pipeline. Okay. And all of this was politically driven. It was not bureaucratically driven. It was not professionally driven. It was politicians who demanded this transfer and politicians who brought pressure on a reluctant bureaucracy, a reluctant regulatory authority to get it done. And therefore, wastewater is a political and water is a political issue.
So just one more question in this line. Water from your STPs in Bangalore has to be now pumped quite a distance. So that cost is borne by the BWSSB?
No. So this is a compact between the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board, which is a treater of wastewater, and the minor irrigation department. The minor irrigation department treats this as a lift irrigation schemes. The cost of pumping is now coming to about 80 lakh rupees a month for roughly about 270 million liters per day, right? So that 80 lakhs per month is being borne by the minor irrigation department.
Okay. Yeah. So that explains why it's not considered a headache for BWSSB to additional expenditure for them.
Well, actually, a compact can be arrived at between the BWSSB and the minor irrigation department, whereby the BWSSB should get a certain amount of money for supplying the treated wastewater, right? Because if they sell this to industries or if they sell it for non-potable use to other areas, they get some monies. They get 28 rupees a kiloliter. But when they give it to farmers, they're not getting any money. That financial contract is being worked on, and it will be fine-tuned over some time, I guess. So, for example, fisheries in the lakes, which are now filled, which will earn money in lakhs and crores, 50% of that, if it comes to the minor irrigation department, they can manage their electricity bill. Just the fisheries in these lakes.
Okay, now moving on to decentralized sanitation systems, because you have worked a lot on that also. And again, we can start with the metro like Bangalore or Delhi. What is the potential of decentralized sanitation meeting what percentage of requirements of a 2 million, like in India, it's Delhi is 20 million. Bangalore, I believe, is about 10 million or what?
Population is 12.3 million, 12.3 million.
12.3 million. So in large metros, what is the potential actually of decentralized systems? How much percentage of, say, a population or a spread does not require centralized systems? Is there any study or assessment done on this?
Well, it's just getting into gear. So in Bangalore, it's mandatory for a set of 20 flats and above, or 20 buildings in a particular layout, in a particular gated community. If it crosses 20, then they have to have their own wastewater treatment plant, 20 flats or above. And that wastewater treatment plant has to be zero liquid discharge. In the sense, all the treated wastewater has to be consumed within the apartment or within the gated community. And so therefore, there are now about 4,000 such decentralized wastewater treatment plants, of which about 80% are dysfunctional, right? So there's a challenge here. You can make the law, but you'll have to understand how it plays out on the ground. For the builder, a decentralized wastewater treatment plant is a cost. But for the person, the residents who live there, it is a running expense, right? The builder skims on costs and puts in a lousy technology and goes away, some builders. Then the residents association is left to handle this white elephant, and then they find it very difficult to move. But if the builder is good, and if there's a good compact with the residents association, and if they set up a good wastewater treatment plant, in the Bangalore context, where opportunity cost for water, suppose you're going to get tanker water, it's 100 rupees a kiloliter. In that case, this wastewater starts to make economic sense, and you get back the money in 3 to 3.5 years for a wastewater treatment plant. So if we work the ecosystem well, currently decentralized wastewater treatment plants are providing capabilities of 300 million liters per day in Bangalore. The city itself is going to do it for about 1,400 million liters or 1,600 million liters. So it's a significant chunk. The city does 1,600 MLD. Decentralized systems will do 300, and it will increase to around 400. So about 25%, 20%, depending on how you see the mix, will be done by decentralized treatment plants. The challenge is to get these to function well, to function correctly, make economic sense, not just regulatory or legal sense, but make economic sense so that you have a buy-in from the residents association.
And this you're saying 25% is for treatment or water supply, or for wastewater treatment?
Wastewater treatment, wastewater treatment.
Okay. So in Bangalore, Vishwanath, it has happened because SSB raised its hand and said we can't supply more water. But wherever there is friction is not there so much in, say, Eastern India or other cities, there will always be a tendency for the municipality to expand the water supply.
Yeah, so it depends on the opportunity cost of water. Like I said, because in Bangalore, the water is very costly, plus the affordability of the residents is also high. And there's a mindset which looks at decentralized wastewater treatment plants. So therefore, it's possible in Bangalore. It will not be possible in areas where water is cheap, where wastewater discharge into the environment is not opposed. Here, because the citizens went to court and the court took it up, saying that you cannot have wastewater streams in our lakes and rivers, therefore it happened. If citizens in a city have a chalta hai attitude, it's not going to happen. And there will be pioneering cities, there will be pioneering institutions, and there will be not so pioneering ones. And the time scale we are talking about is 25, 20, 30 years is my opinion. So it will not take off in Eastern and Northern India so easily.
But even in Bangalore, BWSSB is still mandated to supply water, no? You're saying only wastewater they are not. But water supply, drinking water, they are still mandated to supply?
Yeah. So they're still mandated to supply, but their responsibility they take when the pipe network has reached. So in the periphery, where the pipe network has not come, people are completely dependent on groundwater and tanker water, right? That's about 20% of the population to 25% of the population. And there, the decentralized wastewater treatment system makes sense because it substitutes for very high priced water.
So this decentralized systems which are coming up in peri-urban Bangalore are more like packaged sewage systems. I mean, they are packaged STPs of smaller size, isn't that so?
Yes, so there are different technologies being used. Some of them are packaged, but some of them are activated sludge process, the traditional one of a open storage plant with oxygen being pumped, to the high-end one, which is an MBR-based one, where you can take drinking water to potable standards. And there's one set of apartments here which actually drinks their own wastewater. TZ apartments, they blend it with fresh water from their wastewater treatment plant, MBR system, and they drink it.
See, in Delhi and maybe other cities of India, usually in the peri-urban, they either relocate the slums or the poor settlements and unauthorized colonies come up. So there, how can this be a solution? I mean, you can't expect them to install their own treatment plants.
The poor should be entitled to the first charge on water supply from the city and sewerage systems from the city. It's the rich who should do the decentralized systems, because the rich have the capacity to invest and the capacity to manage and monitor it. Unfortunately, what's happened in India is that both of these are hugely subsidized, the water supply and the sanitation, right? And it's the rich who are getting the subsidies. And the poor are being deprived of the services, therefore have to pay a high cost. So the universal connection system demands that the poor have first right on city networks.
Okay. Then coming to medium and small towns, there also the high cost of laying down sewerage systems prevents these centralized systems from reaching. So what do you see in the coming 20 years, the trajectory likely in these medium and small towns? Will they start going for sewerage systems and will they follow the same trajectory as large cities?
But Depinder, I'm having a rethink on this. You know that I've been a decentralized person and working on it. I've been working on 3 or 4 small towns around Bangalore. My young researchers have been working on it. Tumkur and Chikbalapur, small towns. Tumkur is 4 lakh population. Chikbalapur is about 1.5 lakh population. What I'm finding is the opportunity cost for accessing water from a centralized system is a borewell, right? And a borewell costs you 5 to 6 times more than the cost of a water connection. The opportunity cost for a sewerage connection, if you do a sewerage connection, you have to pay about 7,000 to 9,000 rupees for a mainstream sewerage connection. But if you make your own pit or septic tank, it costs you 50 to 60,000 rupees. Yeah, exactly. Now, the fecal sludge guys come around and saying that it has to be desludged every 3 years, every 1 year, every 2 years. There is a cost of 1,000 rupees again, or 1,500 rupees, depending on the town. Whereas in the sewerage system, you pay something like 20 to 25 rupees a month, right? Which is a more decentralized budget, and then it can be put. I am more and more inclined in the towns that I'm seeing that a centralized system is way cheaper than a decentralized system. And the opportunity cost for decentralized systems is way higher.
Okay. That's I think also borne true if you analyze the costs per capita. Although per capita of centralized system, sewerage system is about 10 to 20,000 per capita, but that's a one-time cost. And the cost of a septic tank, as you were also saying, would be minimum 20 to 60,000. You know, it depends upon the size and connections which you have. So, so in terms of these small towns, still that 20,000 per capita has to be invested by the state, and many state governments and ULBs don't have that kind of money. So they are still going with centralized sewerage these systems, but on a slower pace. Yeah.
So here's the thing, Depinder. I think we're at the right scale of the economy now, where we have to turn our attention to investing in water and sanitation. It makes huge health sense and it makes huge economic sense. We should not lock ourselves into a suboptimal on-plot system and just then, therefore, not be able to do the investments there. Many states now have the capacity. For example, Telangana has shown, Andhra Pradesh has shown that it can, and Tamil Nadu is showing that it can bring in huge amounts of money into water supply and sanitation. I think we should ride the momentum, and every state which can invest should invest in these large systems quickly.
Just one interesting fact came to my mind, and I think I need your idea on that also. In most cities, Vishwanath, we have seen in the north or south, that cities are coming up with what they call sullage treatment. For example, these big cities, they feel that they are not able to ensure sanitation connectivity, sewerage connectivity. So it's better to treat the nala water, because finally everything flows in the drains and the nalas. So what they are coming up is installing some kind of nala or sillage treatment, some kind of an STP at the end of the nala where it joins the river or, downstream. So then they say, okay, this is the best way to ensure some treatment is happening. So this we have seen happening. Somebody told me in Lucknow, for example, there are these 40 drains and they try to do it on 20 of them and they find it difficult. So, and I saw that in small Andhra towns also. I was surprised they have these sillage treatment plant DPRs there. This I heard that. So this is also being seen as a quick solution to any kind of sewerage system provision.
Right. Yeah, it's an intermediate solution. It should be tried. The challenge would be in towns where there is also industrial effluents being let into the stormwater, right, into these drains. And if then you have a combination of industrial and domestic effluents, it becomes very difficult to treat. So you have sewage treatment plants, you're able to, in theory at least, be able to separate out the industrial effluents and the domestic effluents and treat it. So this would be intermediate solutions to help lakes and river beds. For sure, we should do it, but we should not let our hopes be only on this.
I agree. I mean, there it can't be distinguished. But just coming back again to this example of Bangalore of water supply through your treated plants, the first challenge there, as you were explaining in Bangalore, you need to first treat the water. If the treatment is not happening, then this kind of reuse of water is also not possible. And the CPCB reports in India say that we have only 37% of our sewage being treated. So that remains a big challenge in many cities, especially in North India. And the system doesn't work not because the technology is a failure, but O&M costing is not either paid for, or if it is paid, it is not used. So that kind of a challenge, I think, is more like a systems challenge, at least in terms of steps. I think you have rightly said that ensure this, then do this, ensure this, then do that. And not therefore rely on sillage treatment eventually, as one-stop solution. So any ideas you have on that?
So again, this is also city specific and what I say. Now CPCB says that 30% is treated or 37% is treated and 63% is untreated. In my city, in Bangalore, I find that there's not a drop of either untreated wastewater or treated wastewater, which is left waste. Agriculture is picking it up, whether it's treated or untreated, and it's growing crops. The question is, what kind of crops should they grow and how can we make sure that the health risks and environmental risks are managed? So there is no wastage of wastewater. There is a use of wastewater. Whether we want it treated, to what standards, all becomes a secondary issue. I think there is merit in trying to understand what the informal sector or the agricultures are doing and to start to improve the practice of their cultivation. And one example that I constantly give is if you grow non-edible crops, you've eliminated the health risk for the consumer. Non-edible crops like flowers or eucalyptus or acacia, or even fodder crops, or even mulberry for silk, which is one example that I keep giving. So there's a way that we need to address wastewater, which goes beyond sewage treatment plants. Till we get all our sewage treatment plants in place for 20 years or 25 years, we'll have untreated wastewater flowing in our streams. We may call it sillage treatment, we may call it reuse by agriculture. We have to focus and develop a strategy for that. And that is risk-based, not standards-based. We'll have to understand how it's operating and do something about it, right? The second point which comes here is now the standards for treatment are being set by the National Green Tribunal. It's not CPCB or CPHE who is setting the standards, it's the NGT which is set the standard. NGT now says biological nutrient removal, which says that phosphorus has to be less than 1 and nitrates, total nitrates have to be less than 10. What we're finding in our city, Bangalore, is that we have to now invest in our old STPs and even the new ones for BNR. And these are biological nutrient removal. And these are in hundreds of crores. Investments are called for in hundreds of crores. And this treated wastewater is again going for agricultural use, where the nitrogen and phosphorus is an essential fertilizer.
Yeah.
So somewhere this fit for purpose treatment standards has to be arrived at also, which we are not doing. We cannot let a judicial body set standards for India. It has to be a much more inclusive kind of standard setting.
Okay, just the last part, I wanted some ideas of yours on some of these approaches and frameworks and how relevant they are for India and what can be done actually to make them relevant or to use them in a positive or purposeful way? Or are there any other norms and standards and approaches which we have left out? And so if we start, I remember the World Bank in the late 90s had come up with a water vision for a state. They had asked each state to come up with some water vision. And then the Swajal project had come after that. And then we had city development plans under JNNURM. And then we have city sanitation planning. And now we have shit flow diagrams and CWIS and clues and, sanitation safety planning and everything. So what do you see as a relevance for these for India?
This is a tragedy with us. The best and the brightest are chasing intellectual fetishes, which have very little to do with on-ground change. All these plans and all these things then occupy the mind space of a whole bunch of people, and they sort of work on it and make these beautiful red, green charts, and I don't know what not, and so many reports. Somewhere we'll have to see how we can go up the sanitation ladder and what that does that mean. And that will be different from city to city, right? It will be based on the capacities of the cities, the wishes of its citizens, the best thing for it, depending on the context. These plans in the SFD, for example, for me, it's been such a waste of time. 3 years or 4 years, and God knows how many tons of money have gone into creating those arrows moving here, there, red, green. Similarly, with the city-wide CWIS, we had these sanitation plans under the National Sanitation Policy. We created those CSPs, right? Whatever happened to them? Yeah, whatever happened to them, and none of them took off and all that. These are distractions in the sector, actually on the ground, and these distractions should be minimized as far as possible, but they cannot be, because the intellectual mind is a monkey mind. It runs way ahead of the practical mind.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to share? I have run out of my questions.
No, so what I find fascinating, Depinder, is the engagement of the informal sector with waste and sanitation, right? Some negatives are there in terms of some huge negatives in terms of manual scavenging, but there are also positives where farmers are engaging with it, honeysuckle operators are engaging with it from the informal sector. I don't think we've paid enough attention to their role and what can be done to strengthen their role to go one step ahead in the solution. And somehow the word informal seems to be an anathema sometimes in this sector. People keep getting a bit angry about the use of the word informal. We learned from the solid waste management sector that if the rag pickers are becoming part of the solution, there's a great merit in doing that. We learned it in Pune, we're learning it in Bangalore, that they cannot be replaced by a formal system almost immediately, right? And it's a question of livelihood. So therefore, a livelihoods-based, informal sector-based approach to sanitation and wastewater reuse would be very important.
Okay. So I think I can just conclude by saying that you rightly highlighted the role of the urban local bodies and decentralization in a more democratic framework as the answer to more sustainable and inclusive water and sanitation use in India, and the role of informal sector and seeing all kind of seeing the city and its priorities and some kind of solutions which flow over a period of time, not say now FSM, tomorrow something else and like that. So whichever system works till we have till we reach a full treatment and safe containment and treatment of our systems, whether it is through sewerage or other priorities, if it can be paid for by citizens and the government. So I think that's very useful, Vishwanath. Thanks a lot for coming on board, and thank you very much.
My pleasure, Depinder. It's always a joy to talk about this subject with people who know about it.
Thank you, Vishwanath.
Right. Bye-bye.